Discussing The Wager, a book written by David Grann. It's a novel, it's a historic novel, which means it's written in sort of a novelistic narrative way, but it's based on true facts. At least that's my interpretation. This is a book about adventure, about failure, about human psychology, politics at the small scale, which is when people are stranded on an island and how governments evolve from nothing. So it's kind of akin of the television show in the 2000s, something, I forgot the name, about a mining town in Wyoming, Deadwood. So it's kind of like that, like a new place, a new organization, human psychology, what happens, leadership, cheating, criminals, all that kind of stuff. And then we also have the big picture, the empire, the British Empire that goes from an island nation to a global empire, and certain vectors that are definitely coming across in the book that I think that are definitely, that are the main characteristics of such an empire, or maybe the success factors. Of course, in hindsight, everything is interpretable, but I still think that some of these aspects that you can read in the book about the discipline and the devotion to duty, and also the punishment and the consequences of not following the devotion to duty and things along those lines, those types of vectors are crucial for the existence of an empire. For new listeners, why do we discuss books on the Not Even Wrong podcast? It's because books are not just a pastime of hedge fund managers, it's part of the job. We have to continuously train our mind, we have to continuously work on ideas and try to think differently. And books help us do that. Books are like the conditioning of the mind. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's November 5th, 2023. This is Script Telco. It's a Sunday. There is no update. We are up 19.6% for the year. The market's up 13.5%. We're outperforming by 77.1%. The Major, it's, like I said, a historic novel by David Grann. It's a book about a journey, a passage in the sort of mid-18th century from Britain towards the Pacific, surrounding Cape Horn. It's a book about war strategy. You learn about how the British Admiralty thought about fighting wars. In that particular case, it's the war against Spain. But it's really not about the war. It's about the ship and the social dynamics of the ship. I would say this is the first point that I want to make here. The social dynamics on the ship, the captain, the first mate, the second mate, the crew, and that becomes a lot more prevalent than when they strand. This is a book about, and that's true. The Voyager is a ship that did strand somewhere in the South Chilean coast, on a cove somewhere. I don't remember exactly why they stranded. It was one of those situations where they didn't have a choice. They had to do something, maybe go closer to the coast to avoid larger waves, and then they couldn't navigate, and then they stranded on the rock, and the ship basically sank, and they had to survive on the island. I think this is sort of, it's still point one, which is social dynamics, but the more interesting thing is now they're stranded on an island, so they're castaways, and this is sort of Robinson Crusoe, but with at scale, right? It's not just one person, but several persons. So it's a social experiment, if you will, a natural social experiment of how people who grew up in a place like England in the 18th century, how they would organize themselves if cast away on a new place, on a new island, completely independent of the power structure, the social structure of the homeland. And what happens is actually very interesting, because I think the way the narrator portrays this is that they organize themselves almost the same way. There's hierarchies, there is strong abidance to the law. In fact, there is a thirst for law, and this is the second point I want to make here, which is that when you take all of that away, when you basically put people out in anarchy, which they were. I mean, there was nobody there to punish them if they stole, or there was nobody there to punish them if they decided not to follow the queen or the king. I think there was a king back then. I mean, they had no, they weren't forced to be law-abiding British citizens, but they chose to do so. So in the most agonistic way, in the deepest agony that you could imagine a seaman of the 18th century Britain to be left in, which is cast away on a freezing island in the South Chilean coast with no human soul around, or at least not knowingly. There were some native tribes that later on found them, but they didn't know about this. And they still are, there's a thirst for law, there's a thirst for structure, there's a thirst for, hierarchy, all of these things. Now, also, there is resistance. And this is the third point I want to make, is that the whole thing breaks apart. It's basically a mutiny, if you want, but it's not declared as a mutiny, and that's part of the fourth point I'm going to make about how governments deal with information. And there's a beautiful quote in the book which says, truth is when you strip narrative of the ornament, truth is when you strip events of the ornament of narrative. I like this quote a lot, which is, when you take everything away, the ornament of narrative is a nice poetic way to say propaganda. And we have that all the time, even today. The truth is when you strip events of the ornament of narrative. You can pick your topic. Is it climate change, COVID, the Middle East conflict? There's the truth and there's the ornament of narrative, which puts us in the political sphere, which puts us in the sphere where we know we can't believe what people say, so we have to kind of follow their political views. So these are things that come across. But let's get back to the point that I wanted to make here, which is that you have these hierarchies, and you also have, like I said, it's a mutiny. So this was a mutiny, and then you have this natural desire of people to fight against oppression, to disagree with leadership. In this case, people disagree with the captain. So what they chose to do is then, literally fight for better situation. In fact, take over the leadership and an uprising. So basically, that's what I'm trying to say. And I think it's very, very important to understand that you have these two dynamics in every situation. I think this is an anthropological study, this wager story, because you will always have the thirst for hierarchy, and then you will have the uprising. And this goes back to what I noticed, let's say, during the COVID times. There is probably 20% of people who are strongly hierarchically minded, 20% of people who are incredibly independent and will always uprise against anything you throw at them. And then there's a 60% which just follows wherever the wind blows. So I think this is very similar in this particular situation. So the wager is really an anthropological study, if you will, about these dynamics, and I think it's really interesting. To me, that was the most interesting part of the book. I'm not that much interested in 18th century seafaring tales and how they used to live and eat, what they ate, and all that stuff. That wasn't really my focus, but the anthropological study of having a bunch of grown-up men, educated men, non-educated men, whatever, from different backgrounds, being stuck on an island. To me, that was really that was very interesting. That was worth studying and reading the book. So the fourth thing I want to point out, like I said, it's the sort of story of the British Empire, right? So we have this British Empire, which is a seafaring nation, and the mutiny of the Voyager, which is not really a mutiny, and the mutiny of the Bounty, which is the famous one, came about 40 years later. But it's interesting how the Empire deals with this. The narrator actually talks about this, or the book, how the Empire was trying to put everything under the carpet, how there was a legal proceeding, and the legal proceeding was really more concerned about saving face of the Empire and less about finding the truth about what happened. So things like that. And this reminds us of modern day warfare in particular. Whenever there's a war, propaganda kicks in, the truth doesn't come out, and then you throw in money, and we unfortunately have fiat money, so we almost have unlimited money for these types of situations. So governments have constant incentive to lie, to pretend that something is that isn't, or something isn't that is, and so on and so forth. And I think this book is a good lesson. So to me, those are the most important things. So to summarize the 4 big takeaways from the Voyager, number 1, it's a anthropological study of life in general, of just seamen, seafaring type people, how they structure themselves on remote voyages. I think this is something that we will soon have again with when we start exploring space, become a seafaring nation. Right now, we're sort of stuck in where like somebody said, I was born too late to explore the Earth and too early to explore the stars. So we're a bit in between, but this will come, and I think it's worth reading books like this to understand how people organize themselves when they go to remote places like that. I think the second point I want to make is the interesting thing is about the sort of natural tendency to abide to the existing hierarchies, at least in this case. This might be just a British thing, a British Empire thing. Maybe the Brits had this type of inclination because when you are stuck on a castaway island and you still abide to the old rules of your empire, that means you really are devoted to the rules, and that's really interesting. So it's not that they're coerced. It's not like the Brits had no choice. I wonder if you put, let's say, a bunch of communists on an island like that, would they still abide to communism? I think this would be a good acid test, in my point of view, a good acid test of what is really a natural, organic political system and what isn't. I think the test would be, what would they choose if they were on a castaway island? I think the third point I want to make is that you have this natural tendency of hierarchy, but you also have the natural tendency of uprising. And the fourth, I think you have the sort of empire which is not going to tell the truth, and the truth is when you strip events of the ornament of narratives. Thank you.